So officially, when we're talking about fisheries, we cannot separate that from concepts surrounding food security. If you actually look at Nunavut particularly, it has an incredibly high rate of food insecurity compared to the rest of Canada. And this is not only because of the remote location that it is in, but also the cost of just getting food to these areas is exorbitantly expensive, and so that makes the purchasing of food expensive, and then the imposition of a wage economy and the purchasing of food rather than subsistence harvest has led to increased food insecurity. So fisheries, because fish are so abundant in these areas, fisheries support nutritious and culturally available foods in the region. But at the same time, culturally, sharing of harvested food, so we call it country food in the north, is a central part of Inuit life, but that has further been impacted by the wage economy. So now that things are a lot more expensive, things like fuel, going out on the land is quite costly, how this is changing the way that people are able or willing to share food among community members, among their family members, it is potentially a negative impact. So for natural resource management and development, that's another consideration that we have. So that would be the cultural implications. But it is recognized, of course, that fisheries are culturally very significant. Inuit people have a strong connection to the land, and fish play a large role in that. So fish and fishing provide culturally relevant economic opportunity. And this is something that the GN has recognized after community consultations to develop their Nunavut fishery strategy updates. They essentially determined that inshore Arctic char fisheries, so that would be more community-based Arctic char fisheries, offer the best opportunity for long-term socioeconomic well-being, which would include increasing food security and providing job security in Nunavut. But there are many aspects of the creation of these fisheries that are still largely unknown and indeterminate. So the fish that we're focusing on during this research is Arctic char. They are a beautiful species. They are very tasty, and they're also biologically amazing because they are incredibly polymorphic. They are able to inhabit the most northern regions of the world, and they are idiroparous, and they can be either anadromous or non-anadromous. So they can spawn multiple times in their lifetime. So that's somewhat different from Pacific salmon, if you're familiar with those, where they will spawn once and then they will die after they spawn. So it's kind of a one-shot deal. But for Arctic char, they spawn, depending on the latitude that they're in, maybe every 3 to 4 to 6 years. The amount of time in between their spawning bouts will increase as the waters get colder and the seasonality changes. So as you go north, I mean. So where fisheries tend to target these on a commercial scale is typically during their migrations, when they bottleneck in rivers and streams. And so that would be potentially during outmigration in July, and then in migration in the fall. So this would be open water in the Arctic, and even in July, we're still dealing with sea ice in a lot of their distribution that where we are studying. So Arctic char are also a little bit, because they are so polymorphic and they're enigmatic little critters, they don't always follow the rules. And current fisheries management that is done in the Arctic is still based on, or in the Arctic, I mean in Nunavut specifically, is still based on the old Northwest Territories management and policies. And a lot of that was brought in from the way that Pacific salmon were and are continue to be managed, and that is looking at single watersheds for quotas. So the commercial extraction rates, how many pounds that can be taken for Arctic char, are still designated by watershed. So what I have here is a little excerpt, a figure from J.S. Moore and Les Harris and all studies or study where they looked at the level of population mixing. They combined biotelemetry with genomics to investigate essentially what is the site fidelity in Arctic char. Do they stick to the same river systems, and do they overwinter in the same watersheds all the time, like the quotas may suggest, or do they actually move around? And this was evidenced by the fact that indeed, they do seem to move around. However, it is very interesting. It's mostly in rivers or watersheds that are proximate. So within Wellington Bay, as an example. And then it seems like during their spawning year, when they're going to spawn, they have high site fidelity. They will go back to where they are from. But in their non-spawning years, they may stray to nearby watersheds. So in this region in particular, we have very different geography, where one of the rivers is quite long and one of the rivers is quite short. And so in their non-spawning years, these fish tend to be going up the easy migration to the areas where there is a large amount of overwintering habitat, compared to a longer migration where there may be less competition and more suitable spawning and rearing habitat. So suffice to say, the point of this is essentially that the way that Arctic char are currently being managed on this watershed scale quota system is not necessarily biologically relevant, because you may be harvesting fish that are from other watersheds if you are harvesting during the migratory period at all. Actually, if you are harvesting in the winter as well. So can we ensure that all of this push for Arctic char development, fisheries development, is truly sustainable? And so as biologists, as people who work in natural resource research or management, we're very comfortable with studying the environment. We're very comfortable at looking at, okay, well, can Arctic char populations sustain this level of X level of harvest? What is the recruitment? Are we going to be dealing with, where are the stocks located? Those are questions that we're very comfortable with. But when you're actually trying to address true sustainability, you also need to be looking at societal factors as well as economic factors. And so that has been my kind of trajectory away from pure sciences, as I've joined these Genome Canada projects and been part of the GELS team, where GELS stands for ethical, environmental, economic, and legal, and society. It's essentially the social science team of these research projects. And so that's where I'm doing my postdoc currently. So within the ISRs, they're represented by Inuit Tapiriit Kenatami, and they have come out with a national Inuit research strategy, which calls upon researchers to produce new knowledge that empowers Inuit, specifically with the ideal of improving Inuit's ability for self-determination, not only in research, but also in things like natural resource management. And so anybody who is doing work in the North should be adhering to the stipulations that are put forth as part of this research strategy. And so that is the lens through which we are conducting all of our research. And at the same time, the government of Nunavut has explicitly stated that it's absolutely critical for any Arctic char fisheries development that gaps in both scientific and local knowledge are filled to ensure sustainability. But what does this mean? So this means knowledge co-production, as we've mentioned, but what do we need to do to create effective knowledge co-production? So knowledge co-production is not knowledge integration. So this is something that you may have seen in other research projects, particularly in older research projects where we as Western scientists maybe weren't doing the right things all of the time. And so integration is the act of collecting local knowledge and selectively incorporating it into research when it's found to be appropriate or suitable to the researchers or to the research question. But we need to be very, very cautious with any knowledge integration. That's not to say that there aren't places where this is, agreed upon as the correct way to move forward. but it is with an abundance of caution that this should happen, because there are concerns about whether or not that knowledge, it is the correct knowledge that's being recorded. Are the interpretations of the knowledge appropriate, and how can you be assured of that if you are not a knowledge holder yourself? How do you decide what knowledge claims are more legitimate than other knowledge claims as a researcher? And how are the knowledge holders that you have been working with able to control how their knowledge is used? So knowledge co-production is joining the research objectives and the research bodies together in order to avoid those kinds of conflicts. However, there are additional kind of caveats and concerns about knowledge co-production in and of itself, depending on the way that it's executed. So there's the potential to have negative impacts on overall cultural resiliency. And I'll go into what I mean by that in a second. But knowledge integration can still be considered a component of co-production depending on the level of involvement of all parties. And there are still inherent power dynamics where researchers typically are in control of the research through the funds, through the control of the data, and then through the decision-making process about how that research is disseminated, what research outlets are being used, you know, the communication avenues that we typically will execute as part of our research projects and our reporting, for example, academic publications that are behind paywalls and the like. So there's this inadvertent imposition of Western values, which can innately erode culture. Reporting only science-based interpretations is an example, or supporting only science methodology. So the crux of all of this, the true challenge is, and I'm not saying that I know all the answers, absolutely not, but just fostering conversation around this. How do we execute knowledge co-production without jeopardizing those traditional knowledge systems and associated cultural identity? So this is a question that I posit essentially to the disciplines at large. We need to work together to be able to figure out the best research methods in order to address some of these innate challenges. So Peter Usher in 2000 published a fairly seminal paper in Arctic that addresses traditional ecological knowledge in natural resource monitoring and management. And in our very empirical reductionist ways, we like to distill everything into digestible units. And so this is a really great way, I think, of trying to suss out from an outsider's perspective where we're maybe overstepping boundaries and where certain ethical lines are being crossed. So we have traditional knowledge category 1, which is factual knowledge about the environment, including empirical observations, general observations, things that are essentially more objective directly. And then category 2, which is more factual knowledge about how the environment is used. So it's taking those objective things from category 1 and then how they're overall interacting with the environment on a personal scale. So that's past and present, for example, harvest levels or occupancy. And then we start to get into more cultural aspects of knowledge. For example, moral and ethical statements and how things are supposed to be done, what is proper. This is also inclusive of the well-being of nature in a holistic sense. And then finally, category 4, which is the foundation of everything, the framework from which people truly construct knowledge from the facts that they believe in their lives. And so as researchers, we cannot pretend, or we cannot even attempt to interpret information using other cultures' category 3 or category 4 knowledge types. This is beyond the capacity of anybody, essentially. This is where things like knowledge co-production are really, really crucial. And the ability of a culture to maintain steadfast use of category 3 and 4 knowledge types is what is building core social norms and maintaining cultural resiliency. So if our research can foster and make room for ulterior interpretations in terms of moral and ethical statements and the way that data is, or facts are, interpreted and become knowledge, then we are potentially more situated to be able to promote and foster cultural resiliency. And so as a biologist, I really do love the idea of coevolution. It's probably my favorite research topic. I do study parasites. So I like the idea of presenting this as sort of a knowledge coevolution framework, where if you think about your own research programs and how you've gone about interacting with communities, if you have done so, where was that, when did you formulate your research question? How did you involve communities? When did that happen? At what stage? So this knowledge coevolution framework was recently published in Sustainability Science if you're interested in like the more hashed out version of it, but just a quick run through right now. This is based on Marshall's sort of two-eyed seeing with trust, respect, open-mindedness, and mutual learning, but considering that from all sides. But I think we have a moral and ethical obligation as the dominant society in this case to take some additional burden of that and to try to be additionally open-minded and make more space for Indigenous knowledge types when possible. So I'm just going to walk through this. Essentially, the focus is the identification of the knowledge gap. Preferentially, that would be by the community to ensure that the research is actually directly addressing community concerns or things that are important for community and local well-being. If that's not the case and a researcher has an idea and they want to approach a community, that's fine as well, of course, especially if that idea is going to benefit the community. But there needs to be that mutual knowledge sharing stage that occurs after the identification of that knowledge gap where all parties are involved. And this is a component that can involve a lot of training and capacity building, not only like, oh, we're training Indigenous people, blah, 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 but also Western scientists being trained in, social science methods or things that are going to improve their ability to work with a variety of knowledge types. So after the knowledge sharing, that would be when the formulation of the research question truly is, and then moving on to a knowledge gathering stage. So we have our kind of categories 1 and 2, direct observations, past and present temporal trends, historical observations and the like, and then bringing those together in a knowledge unification, which is really grounded in not only Indigenous categories 3 and 4, but also researcher categories 3 and 4. And it is the way that those two foundational understandings interact that I think is the crux of some of these challenges that we're all maybe a little worried about. But I would argue that until you try, you shouldn't be worried about it, because from my experience, it has actually gone very smoothly. Not very smoothly, but it actually has worked out. So then forward into knowledge interpretation, which is, constructing facts, knowledge about the world, and then finally the application of that knowledge in a moral and ethically suitable way. And the objective of this, assuming that this is something like fisheries as an example, would be to promote self-determination. So after all of this research process, empowering local communities and working with them to create a fisheries monitoring plan, and so that the researchers can then step back and let the culturally appropriate fisheries monitoring plan potentially be executed by the community. And then from there can be a cyclical research process. So this is all very conversational. It is not unidirectional, and it involves a great deal of iteration throughout each stage. And so I'm going to provide an example of a research project that has attempted to, I'm not saying that we did it 100%, but we have attempted to use a truly iterative knowledge co-production or coevolution process. If you're interested in this research process, it was recently published far more detailed in the most recent issue of Arctic Science. So that's Stefan Schott is the lead author. So with the Genome Canada Towards a Sustainable Fishery for Nunavummiut project, it was initiated by the community of Jowhaven because they already had a researcher present in the community that they were very familiar with and friendly with. And so they approached him saying, we want to develop our char fisheries, but we understand that it has failed in the past. And so we need additional support in order to make sure that this is done properly. And so Peter de Groot went back to Queen's University and submitted an application for a large-scale applied science project through Genome Canada and won. And so through that funding, they were able to start more seriously figuring out what the actual research process was going to look like in a more collaborative way. So this is the project that I joined during my PhD as a research assistant and working on the gel side with Stefan Schott. So the initial research objectives, or the way that the community wanted to start this project, was by recording traditional ecological knowledge, particularly from the community's elders. So this is a multifaceted objective here, not only just to better understand fish distributions and harvest practices in the region, not only current, but also historical from the elders' perspectives, but also to take this opportunity to use this research to record elders' knowledge as their times may be starting to, as their faculties and things start to wind down as they age. We're slowly losing our last elders who were born out on the land in this community. So their knowledge is absolutely important, certainly, to record. So this knowledge was then used collaboratively to select the sampling locations for the genomics work. So looking at trying to do some stock delineation, there's also some microbiome work that was happening through Virginia Walker's lab. And this is sort of where the science departs a little bit from the GEL's objectives here. So the locations, they also wanted to understand specifically from the elders which locations were to be kept specifically for subsistence harvest only. So no commercial development. And so a large number of mapping workshops were held and traditional knowledge recording, and then digitization happened, which is a lengthy process in and of itself. But if you're interested in looking at the outcome from this, it is available at the web address here, tsfn@gcrc.carleton.ca. So we work collaboratively with the Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center at Carleton University for all of the work that I'm presenting today. So what we found, char are truly everywhere. Everybody was reporting consistently that char are everywhere. So you can see some of these lines just circling the entire area, little tongue in cheek. When we ask where are char distributed, they would just circle and say everywhere. So we don't necessarily think that there is going to be a large immediate biological issue when it comes to starting small scale harvest of this species. But there's additional research that's required to prove that. The stocks that are on King William Island, so this is this island here where there's a great deal of observations, should be left specifically for subsistence harvest. And the large stocks that are down on the mainland area, where a lot of people who reside in Jowhaven were actually from before, when they were nomadic and before they were settled in the community, these are the stocks that are suitable for commercial development, in the opinion of those who were interviewed. So from here, there was a lot of conversation about what this data means and now how it is informing, actual fishery development. And it turned out that there was still a lot of uncertainty regarding trends at the community level. And this is from even the people who were being interviewed, the Hunters and Trappers Association Board. Was the traditional knowledge collected during mapping still representative of current community practices, and how did fish contribute to community food security today? And then you know, while there does seem to be a large push for commercial fishery development, does the community at large support a commercial fishery in the community? And so we had once again updated research objectives, and what we learned essentially was that, okay, well, we're going to need to do a harvest study, and we had not counted on having to do such a robust harvest study. So we had to apply for additional funding. And that was the grant from Polar Knowledge Canada that supported this large-scale multi-year harvest study that I will be presenting on for the rest of the presentation, actually. So, okay, we have to do a harvest study and we got the money, we're gonna be able to do it. Okay, great. so the objective of this is to determine the relative contribution of fish to overall country food consumption, and then, you know, how fish is shared, or how all country food is shared. And then we recognize this as an excellent opportunity as well to start to collect some of that economic data to inform the economic viability of these fisheries. Is there going to be a fishery in Joe Haven given the current economic restrictions, knowing that shipping and the cost of harvest is so high? So we created a harvest study which used GPS devices and a survey, essentially, to try to track where people were going and what they were harvesting. So we came up with an initial plan together and then sent one of our harvesters off. He was going hunting, so he took the GPS device with him. And then he immediately came back and said, nope, it's no good, bad GPS, it's useful. Says, you know where I am, but I don't know where I am. Because we were using one that was not two-way communication, and that did not, a spot device, if you're familiar. And so we had to upgrade our GPS devices and also refine some of the questions that we were asking in our survey. And also, because of the challenges associated with winter, provide additional batteries and things. So it was really a collaborative community process of figuring out exactly how we were going to run this harvest study. And so we piloted it both in the winter and again in the summer. And finally, after all said and done, we were able to come up with a method that appears to work, though there are certainly some refinements that could be made additionally. But when we went out on we did some traditional knowledge exchange workshops alongside the high school as well, and used those as kind of training and feedback opportunities to see, are people comfortable using this device? Is this going to work? And maybe there's opportunity for using these kinds of technologies in things like fisheries reporting and fisheries management at the community scale. So once again, after all of that, all of the piloting come together and essentially solidify what the research objectives are and the methods that are going to be used. And so working again with GCRC, Amos Hayes is absolutely amazing. He created a specific app on the InReach device that you can use to report while you're out on the land if you have harvested or observed anything, or you can put in your own input if you are seeing things like dangerous conditions and you want it to appear on the map. So this is all reported in real time and uploaded to a central database in real time. So Amos Hayes did all of the software programming alongside with some coding help from Garmin to create this for us. And then we also have been using Harvest Your Data instead of the paper sheets. And so this is kind of our final iteration of this study. So what happens is a harvester who wants to participate signs up by filling out a registration form that includes a whole bunch of socioeconomic questions and also harvest frequency and things like that. And then every time they go out on the land, they take an InReach device with them. They report, hopefully, while they're out there. Reporting is a bit of an issue, but when they get back, they will fill out a trip survey. And that trip survey includes some economic data as well as catch data, and then intention of what they're going to do with what they've caught. So if they're going to be keeping it for themselves, sharing it among households, or potentially selling. So another offshoot of this is the fact that, so Data access is something that has been a really challenging factor in community-based research. Data propriety, who has the ability to see and interact with data. So all of the harvest study data, the tracking, is not accessible. We still have not come to a conclusion about what is going to happen, who's going to be able to see that data. However, knowing that that map existed really piqued everyone's interest, and they decided that they would like to have a live stream of the harvest activities to the community HTA. And so each InReach device also has an SOS on it, so it has a large safety and communication component as well. And so now that we managed to get an additional extension from Polar Knowledge so that we could install a live reporting GPS atlas that says where people are out on the land when they are out, and if there is an SOS button pressed, the screen changes, and if somebody is in the HTA at the time, they will know almost before they actually get contacted by the SOS, the search and rescue. So I'm just going to quickly go through some selected research outcomes, I'm calling it, because I'm not necessarily going to consider these the finite results. So these are research outcomes. But it does turn out from our harvest study that fish are the most reliable source of country food. When people go out to fish, saying they are targeting fish, they are 84% likely to come back with fish. So that is the highest of all of the country food. Muskox is also very plentiful on the island, especially in the winter, but it is not necessarily a preferred food. Caribou is much more preferred, as is seal. So there's lots of really, really cool data that I love looking at, but I just don't have time to get into it today. So when we're considering the cultural sustainability of monetizing a food source, monetizing Arctic char, we need to look at essentially, are people okay to sell it, or is it being shared, or how is this hashing out? And so sharing is still very dominant in this culture, in Joe Haven in particular, and selling is very rare. Okay, so 87% of times that people come in with a harvest, they are not selling any of it. And they can sell it within the community, they can sell it to visiting researchers and things. There's a bit of a social taboo around that, but it is happening more and more. And food sales are also happening quite a bit on Facebook. But what is sold, it does seem to be mostly fish and muskox. The sharing seems to be mostly caribou and seal. So those are kind of the preferred large mammals that are harvested. They are shared much more than they are sold. In our registration survey, we asked if people supported a commercial fishery, and this confirmed our suspicions. It confirmed what we had been hearing from the HTA and the elders, is that yes, 100% of respondents supported commercial fishery development. So this does, I mean, it seems like it's something that is not going to make any large waves with in terms of cultural acceptance of a commercial fishery in the community. So thinking about the economics then, what are the barriers? So what are the current barriers to subsistence harvest, and how might that affect the creation of commercial fisheries? So fuel and money are the main two. So that just the cost of going out on the land. So that's a really big consideration for any kind of fishery development, is what is the cost going to be to get those fish actually back to the community. But interestingly, also repairs and missing parts, they're almost a quarter of the reason that people are unable to go out on the land. And that is because the environment is extremely harsh on equipment, and then also there are not a lot of certified mechanics in town, and there's not a lot of equipment or spare parts in town. So if your machine breaks down, that can mean that you're not going to be able to go hunting for quite some time. Very quickly looking at direct costs, for trips when the intended animal was harvested, fish for subsistence harvest seem to be relatively inexpensive. So $1.88 per pound, and that's including all costs. So labor, not labor, but opportunity costs as well. So if somebody missed work in order to go out, that means, you know, that cost is kind of integrated into these calculations. And so subsistence harvest, largely on King William Island, means that a fish is about $1.88 a pound. Now, unfortunately, because that is all subsistence-based data, and they do not want commercial development to occur where the subsistence harvest often is, it's not necessarily accurate information to use for any kind of economic modeling. So we need more robust kind of targeted commercial fishery data. And I only present this, I know, terrible graph, I'm sorry, or terrible table, but what I want to point out here is that the cost per char, when you look at it from a more commercial perspective, when they're going to places that are on the mainland, it can be very high. So over $20, $26, in one case when the catch was really low, $87 per char. That is not a sustainable amount of money for commercial fishery development. The low cost ones, where Port Perry, so this is that breadbasket place up North King William Island. And then when this was done, including labor costs, you went to Port Perry. Again, incorporating labor costs drove that price right up. So we need to figure out what exactly a commercial fishery could look like given these cost variables. So overall, current locations of commercial fishery quotas do not seem to be economically viable. The current locations are down south on the mainland, and where the community would prefer the commercialization to occur. But we have worked with the community more recently to open exploratory fisheries in the marine environment. So that is in counter to what the typical quota system is in Nunavut at this time. So we need to have future genomic research to assess the stock competition or stock composition of any of these new exploratory locations to see what's going to happen. So that's the real question moving forward. Are these ocean-based fisheries mixed stock, or what do these stocks look like? Where are they migrating from? We have traditional knowledge that is indicating that fish will come out and swim in an anti-clockwise pattern around Chandri Inlet, but you know, what is that actually going to look like once we are able to assign parentage or home stocks to these fishes? And with that, that is where the next Genome Canada project is going to really be focused. So we're looking at trying to find low-cost genomic tools that can be used similar to what's happening in the Pacific salmon fisheries, where they have mixed stock catches, and then they're able to look at what the fishers are harvesting and then assign the home stocks for them and adjust quotas accordingly. Whether or not we can do that in the north that would be really, really amazing, and to be able to have more robust data to better manage these fisheries. And so with fishes, we're at a really nice spot because we have not only access to the TSFN samples that were taken, but also to a lot of other fisheries and oceans historical samples. And so hopefully in the future, I'll be able to present more on the actual biological sustainability of these fisheries while we work towards understanding more whether or not we can achieve economic sustainability of these fisheries at the same time. And so with that, I would be happy to take any questions or open up discussion.
Thanks, Dr. Chapman. Great job on your talk. And so if anybody wants to ask questions, I encourage you to unmute your microphone and introduce yourself, or just you can type one into the chat if you would like. Now I'll read it off. And while we're waiting for questions to come in,
yeah,
I might just ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, the fact that you're working on this makes it now obvious to me why you took a bit longer than 4 years to finish your PhD, which is on something totally different. So I know that this project doesn't involve anybody. I don't think this project involves anybody that was involved in your PhD work. Is that correct? Like,
That's correct.
So how did this happen? How did you get into this project? What was the kind of origin story of it, given that you were working on something totally different with different people during your PhD work?
Yeah, because in my PhD, I had a field season in Cambridge Bay, and I had worked a little bit with Les Harris and the HTA or HTO in Cambridge Bay. There was a job advertisement from Faculty of Public Policy because they were advertising this amazing PhD position to work on this project, but nobody in public policy was applying. They could not fill this PhD position because it was not policy enough, I guess. And so Stefan eventually got to the point where he needed the help, and so he turned it into an RA-ship, and I applied, and because of my experience in Cambridge Bay, I ended up working as a research assistant on this project. So it's really unfortunate that public policy students weren't drawn into such an amazing opportunity. I find that really interesting, but for my own career, I'm fortunate, I guess, or glad.
Cool. There's a question here from Erica Knoll. She is asking, on what basis did the community decide to keep King William Island for personal use?
I think, I mean, I can't really speak for the community's motivation in that, but what is intuitive is that it is consistently accessible compared to the mainland or compared to other regions, because the weather and travel is so harsh. There's whiteouts and things like that that happen all the time. So keeping those fish stocks that are close to the community as healthy as possible and reserved for the community would be certainly a priority, I think, for future subsistence sustainability.
Thanks. I have a question.
Yeah.
In terms of this kind of community-based cooperative approach, how applicable do you think there's applicability in terms of the difficulty that comes along with managing fisheries that are more global with migratory species that are harvested by different countries, not only different communities?
Yeah, I mean, that's like a multi-community based type of research project. I think in some situations, keeping things siloed makes it easier, but trying to bring people who are all extracting the same stocks, let's say if we're talking about tuna as an example, they have working groups and things like that from the scientific perspective, but I don't know how much communities that interact directly with the resource are included in those working groups at this time. So I think that would be a really excellent way to try to integrate kind of co-production into large-scale fisheries management, but whether or not that's something that's in the near future is hard to say. Yeah.
There's another question here that came in from the chat from Dr. Jenny Knopp asking, what did you learn from the Cambridge Bay community commercial fishery, and how does it relate to the Joe Haven situation?
I love that question because we're still working on that. So the community Cambridge Bay fishery is out of Kitikmeot Foods, and it's a really large scale fishery compared to what I think will be happening in Joe Haven. There just isn't the infrastructure in Joe Haven to have the same kind of fishery that Cambridge Bay has. But we're hopeful to learn more about how they organize their timing, how they ensure that they are there for the run. That's a big issue where we are. Sometimes they go, last year they went to try to hit the fall migration at Murchison River and they basically missed it. So kind of those logistical things are what I would really like to be able to learn from the Cambridge Bay fishery and see how we can use that knowledge in any development that happens in Joe Haven.
Another question here from someone named Stephen Cook. He was asking, so I'm going to just paraphrase. He was asking, how do we get the practicing ecology types So if you're just a practicing ecologist who's kind of a new to this whole space of knowledge co-production, to actually just give this a try, rather than getting bogged down in the literature on co-evolution, co-assessment, co-knowledge production, and the philosophy around that. How do you get someone to just give it a try rather than just getting bogged down in the literature? What's your kind of advice there?
Strong supervision, absolutely. People should not be expected to tackle this on their own. And the only way that I was able to do this was through the fact that I was joining a research team that already had a strong relationship with the community. I don't think that it's fair. We can't expect, you know, a master's student to try to initiate solo something like this. So it all comes from leadership. Yeah,
there's a question from Viv, a similar question or you sort of answered it, asking if you're a master's student who only has 2 years for your project and a limited budget, you know, how can they apply these sorts of principles to their work, and what are the most important aspects to like take out of this if you just can't like do everything perfectly? Kind of what are the most important aspects? And Viv is apologizing for this question.
But I think it is a really like critical topic, because this is big, large scale stuff, and it's not something that, you know, a master's project is really, the way that a master's project is currently structured, it falls into nicely. But if you have joined a research project as a master's student, you know, that is trying to involve communities and is participating in co-production, don't be afraid to take a leadership role in communication about your own project and reaching out and talking to, like, picking up the phone. Don't send an email, pick up the phone and call and talk to people to maintain those connections. And with COVID right now, for our research, it's been painfully difficult, because normally we have 3 trips a year and we haven't been able to go. And it's making things really, really challenging to not be on the ground in the community. So I think
just like, related to that, is there any possibility, like for example, next summer or this winter, if you wanted to go, could you do, is there any discussion of having a system where you could do like 3 days of consecutive negative COVID tests and then be allowed to get on a plane and go up there?
I think that, I mean, I don't know. That is happening in NWT. I think they're doing, you test down south, you get there, you test again, and when you get your results, you're free, or northern BC or somewhere. I was talking to a fisheries guy who was saying that. Currently, Nunavut is not there. Nowhere.
Cool. One more question from Dom Roche, saying I recently came across a really neat app by Inuit people called Siku, S-I-K-U, which does a lot of what you wanted to achieve with the GPS you hacked, which are awesome, by the way. Did you witness anyone using this app in the communities you were working with?
I love Siku. I love the thought behind Siku. I think the uptake of Siku has been community centric. It's really popular in Sanikiluaq. I know that there's somebody hired in Johaven to promote the use of Siku,
oh, wow.
But I personally haven't seen it being used actively yet, but maybe it will be picked up more.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Can I just follow up quickly on that? Do you think that, so I know a little bit about the app, I don't know if you've looked at it at all, and would you have been able to use it to collect the data you wanted? Because obviously it's a lot of work to hack those GPSs, and credit to you for doing that. If someone else was to undertake like a similar study to what you did, do you think that there are now tools for them, like for example, CP, to do that more easily?
Sorry, we're breaking up a little bit there, but I think you were asking if like Siku is more accessible?
Well, also whether it actually does what you want it to do. From the videos I've seen, it seems like it's pretty good, and it's pretty easy for people to use.
It is, but it is based on Google platforms, and it is not. So all of our Nunavut atlases are the communities. So they are hosted now in communities. So Siku is a totally different beast. It
wouldn't have worked for your application?
It would not have worked, no, because it is proprietary using Google. So if anything ever happens to Google, where does all that data go?
Oh.
So there's major considerations when you're talking about, yeah, data ownership and long-term storage of ecological knowledge, and who needs to be the steward of it. And for us, and with guidance from GCRC, SIKU really wasn't the answer for what we needed to be able to do. But it wasn't, when we started, SIKU wasn't what it is now.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
So I'll let Paul or Megan yell at me if we need to turn this off or whatever, but there's a few more questions that have come in through the chat. So the next one was, what's something you talked a bit about, obviously, and that's part of what the project is about. The question is, in establishing a commercial fishery, is there any risk of overfishing in this area?
I think at the small scale that the community would be able to maintain, which is going to be comparatively small scale to what we see in other fisheries. Signs point to yes at this time, but we don't necessarily know, how that could shake out in the long term. And there's, of course, the issues of, climate change. How is that going to affect char populations? How are invading salmon going to affect char populations? In some areas it's seeming to have for now, there's a short-term positive effect for Arctic char where they're getting more access to nutrients and so maybe growing faster and reproducing more. These are really multifaceted questions that we don't have the answers to, but all signs right now for low level extraction rates would point to yes,
Yes, the fishery is sustainable or should be sustainable.
It should be, yeah.
The next question was, what is one thing you wish you could have done differently during this project? And what do you expect to see in the kind of the next phase and the future results for the study?
Oh, that is loaded.
Yeah, it is.
I wish COVID didn't happen. What do I wish I would have done differently? We've hired local facilitators and things like that. And we're now working alongside the high school to run traditional knowledge workshops. They are excellent, and I wish we had done them sooner. I think we should have involved the high school sooner. And then another facet of this that I didn't have any time to talk about was that we work alongside the community nutritionists, and we work a lot in the realm of food security. And I think we should have incorporated that collaboration a lot sooner, because we were starting to research topics that we maybe weren't experts in too soon. So I think not being shy to reach out and say like, hey, I'm working on this project and this topic has come up and it's really outside of our research, so can you advise? It's important in these multifaceted research projects.
Next question was another COVID related one. So have you and as the project team for this work discussed how you could potentially conduct socioeconomic research, which often depends on workshops, interviews and stuff in person, how you could do that remotely? Do you think it's possible, or is it best to just delay the work until you can go back up there in person?
This is an ongoing debate. At first we were trying to plan doing things remotely, but it has not been going well in some areas, and in other areas it's going really well. So it really depends on the community's comfort, their bandwidth. Bandwidth is a huge problem. Access to computers, access to internet. So for us in Joe Haven, it's not really a possibility at this time, but for other communities further south, we could definitely consider more of that in the future.
Yeah. So the last question here that we have is another one from Erica Knoll here in the department. She's asking, this is a bit off topic question, but do you know whether there are any developments of electric four-wheelers or snowmobiles that, given the high cost of fuel, like it might make this, these fisheries more economically sustainable if they could just convert to electric vehicles? And she says, thanks for the great talk as well.
It's something that we've talked about. Interestingly, in the Arctic, I'm not sure if you're aware, but like solar panels work really well when it's really cold, just the chemistry behind them or the physics behind them. So there's a lot of solar panels going in to replace.
But then the
those
batteries don't work as well though, right? At the same time.
and then that's what I was getting to. When it's cold, the batteries can't hack it. So even our little GPS devices were dying way too fast. And so we had to provide external battery packs and tell people, like, you can only keep it inside your coat. And everybody knows that up there. But, you know, the battery technology for the winter transportation is not there. As for four-wheelers, I have no idea. Maybe. I don't know. But I mean, it would require a lot of torque. So it's a little bit different than a vehicle. But now that they're coming out with trucks and things, maybe it is in the future. The near future.
Yeah, you'd need a lot of solar panels on top of it though to keep charging the batteries, I guess.
Yeah. It's a little different than the Florida like alligator boats or whatever.
Okay, so I think we'll end it there. We're at just a bit over an hour now. So thanks very much, Jacqueline, for coming to do this talk. Appreciate it, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yeah,
Absolutely, that was a lot of fun.
Thanks very much,
Graham.
Dr. Chapman, and thanks, Graham, for hosting the seminar. All right, take care, everyone.
All right, bye.
Thanks. Bye.